The desert does not forgive. It does not forgive the man who stayed too long. It does not forgive the man who ran. And it does not forgive the silence that grows between what a person does and what they tell themselves they'd. August, New Mexico, 1874. A crowd gathered in the hard noon light. 30 men, maybe 40. Tin cups, clinking, loud voices, the kind of noise people make when they need the noise to drown something out. On the wooden platform, 2 women stood chained. Not afraid, not begging. Done in the back of the crowd, one man was not making any noise at all. He had a leather wallet in his coat. 3 weeks ago it held $11. He had spent $1 on flour he never bought. He had $10 left. Somewhere behind the trading post, a child pressed herself flat against the adobe wall and did not breathe. The auctioneer raised his hand. The man in the back of the crowd reached into his coat. Dry Fork, New Mexico, August 1874. The town of Dry Fork was not a place people chose. It was a place people ended up after the war ended badly, after the ranch burned down, after the wife left or the husband died, or the money ran out somewhere between Kansas and the promise of California. Dry Fork was where forward motion stopped, where the desert simply said no further and people believed it. The main street was dust and timber and the particular kind of quiet that loud places have between moments of noise, a saloon that never fully closed, a dry goods store with a cracked window someone had patched with brown paper 3 years ago and never replaced, a church at the far end of the street whose bell had not rung since the minister rode out in 1871 and did not come back. Nobody wondered where the minister went. That was the thing about Dry Fork. It was a town that had stopped asking questions about the people who passed through it. Questions cost energy. Energy was scarce. The sun took everything that wasn't nailed down, and some things that were. You learned to stop caring about the stories of strangers because the strangers never stayed long enough to finish them. And on this particular Tuesday in August, there was an auction, not for cattle, not for land, for people. The crowd had gathered near the old trading post, 30, maybe 40, ranchers with burned foreheads and opinions, drifters who had attached themselves to the spectacle, the way drifters attached themselves to anything that broke the monotony. A few women in town, dresses standing at the edge with expressions that wanted to be disapproving, but kept slipping into something more complicated. Men in the front row with tin cups, already drinking at noon. The kind of loud that happens when people want to pretend they're comfortable with what they're doing. Eli Cade arrived the way he arrived everywhere, quickly, on a horse that was old but not dead, which was more than could be said for how Eli himself felt most mornings. He was 45 years old and looked every year of it, plus a few that didn't belong to him. The sun had done its work on his face, so had the war, so had 5 years of sleeping outside and eating poorly and riding through country that didn't care whether he arrived or didn't. Brown hair going grey at the temples. Grey eyes with the unsettling quality of looking directly at things most people preferred to look beside. He wore his cavalry coat even in August, because he had nothing else that fit, because some habits survive everything, including the reasons they started. He had no particular plan for Dry Fork. He had no particular plan for anything. He had been riding northwest for 3 weeks, because northwest felt different from where he'd been, and different was the closest thing to a reason he could manage these days. He meant to water the horse, buy flour, leave. That was the plan. He did not follow the plan. He stopped his horse at the water trough and didn't move. He could hear the auctioneer from half a block away, that particular professional voice that is louder than a conversation and quieter than a shout, designed to carry over a crowd without acknowledging that the crowd should maybe feel worse about itself. 2 Apache women, captured legal and proper, strong, healthy, looked at his hands on the reins. Keep moving, said something in him. Something that had kept him alive for 5 years, precisely because it was consistent and practical and did not get involved in other people's problems. He tied the horse to the trough, because of course he did. He pushed through to the middle of the crowd before he saw them clearly. And then he stopped. Two women stood on the wooden platform in front of the trading post doors, chained at the wrist to each other through a single rusted iron link. Both of them tall, taller than any man near them, taller than the auctioneer, who kept stepping slightly to the side as though proximity embarrassed him. Their skin was the color of polished copper in the hard August light. Their arms were the arms of people who had done hard physical labor their entire lives, which was not what the crowd was thinking about when they stared, but it was what Eli noticed first. Because he had spent enough years around cavalry horses to recognize the difference between a body that was strong and a body that performed strength. These women were genuinely strong, and they were genuinely finished with every person in this square. The taller one especially. She stood with her chin up, not performing defiance, not performing anything. She had simply removed herself from the proceedings the way you remove yourself from a conversation that contains nothing real. Her eyes moved across the crowd in slow, even sweeps, categorizing, dismissing. She landed on Eli for a half second, looked through him, looked away. Something in his chest moved. "Don't," said the voice. He looked at her face, then at his hands. Then he did not think at all, which was unusual, because Eli Cade was a man who had spent 5 years doing nothing but thinking and reviewing and revisiting the same 3 moments, the way a tongue returns to a broken tooth. Unable to stop, unable to fix anything, just checking. Still there, still broken. Still my fault. But in this particular moment he reached into his coat and pulled out the leather wallet, and did not think. The wallet had been a gift from his wife, Eleanor. She had pressed it into his hands the morning he rode out with the regiment in the spring of 1869, and she had said, "Come back to us, Eli." And he had said always, and he had believed it when he said it. That was the thing about that morning, that he could not stop carrying. He had meant it. He had genuinely meant it. He had $10 in the wallet, earned 3 weeks ago splitting fence posts for a ranch outside Tucson. He had no other money, no savings, a horse, a coat, a canteen, a rusted revolver he no longer kept loaded, and $10. He walked to the auctioneer's table. $10. His voice came out rough, dry, like a door opened on a room that had been shut a long time. The auctioneer blinked. $10 for which one? Both. Silence. Just for a second. Then the crowd shifted, and someone laughed, and then more people laughed, and someone in the back clanged his tin cup and called out something Eli did not process because he was already setting the coins on the table. One by one. Slow. The way you do things when your hands are not entirely steady and you don't want anyone to notice. $10. Hitting the wood. "This is insane," said some part of him. "Yes," said another part. "Keep going, sir. The bidding starts at—" "I'm not bidding." He did not raise his voice. There was something in the particular flatness of his tone that made people listen without knowing why. "I'm paying $10 for both. And then I'm cutting that chain." More laughter. A man near the front said something about Redskins that Eli did not process because his attention had moved involuntarily to the 2 women on the platform. The taller one was looking at him now, not through, at him, with the specific expression of someone trying to solve a problem that doesn't have enough information yet. The auctioneer looked at the $10, looked at Eli, looked at the crowd. He was a small man with a large mustache, and the fundamental moral flexibility of someone who had been doing this work long enough to have stopped asking certain questions. "Sold," he said. Eli pulled a knife from his belt and cut the chain. The rusted iron dropped to the wooden platform and hit with a sound like something ending, like a period at the end of a sentence that had gone on too long. The crowd went quiet. The taller woman looked down at her wrist, at the broken chain still hanging from the iron cuff. Then she looked up at Eli. "You're not planning to sleep with us," she said. Not a question, more like a hypothesis being tested. Voice low, parched, steady as a fence post in hard ground. Eli looked at her. The sun was directly overhead. It hit his face at an angle that caught every line the years had carved there, every shadow under his eyes, every grey strand at his temple. "No, you've suffered enough." She held his gaze for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression. Not softness. Not yet. Something more careful than that. The way a door doesn't open, but the lock turns. That sound. Just that sound. She said nothing. Her younger sister, shorter by 2 inches, which still meant she looked most men directly in the eye, was watching the crowd. Watching the exits. Watching the spaces between people, the way someone watches spaces, who has learned that spaces are where danger waits. Her hands had moved slightly to a position that made Eli think she had assessed 3 possible ways out of this square and ranked them by order of preference. She had not looked at Eli at all. The auctioneer collected his $10. The crowd began to fragment, the way crowds do when the entertainment ends, and the heat reasserts itself. Eli stepped back, gave them room, because they were not his to stand close to. They never had been. He had no idea what he was doing or why he was doing it, or what happened next had not occurred to him when he walked up to that table. "What did you think was going to happen?" said the voice. "I didn't," said Eli. That was the point. The taller woman's name was Nara. He learned this 4 hours later, when they had been walking northwest through the desert long enough that Dry Fork had dissolved entirely behind them into dust and heat shimmer, and she stopped, turned, and looked at him. Because he had been following them at a distance of approximately 30 yards since the moment they left the trading post square. "Why are you still here?" she said. "Same direction," he said. She looked at him. "North," she said. "North works." Her sister had still not looked at him directly. She moved like someone who had learned to be aware of every living thing within a quarter mile, and to trust the awareness before she trusted anything else. Nara said, "We don't need a protector, I know," said Eli. "We don't owe you anything." "I know that too. I don't know." A pause. Long enough that a hawk crossed the sky above them, and they both watched it without meaning to. "I just haven't had a direction in a while. North feels like something." Nara looked at him for a long time. "Your name," she said. "Eli Cade." She turned back to the desert and started walking. He followed 30 yards back, and that was how it began. The desert in August is not a place that accommodates sentiment. It is simply heat and distance and the specific kind of indifference that very large spaces have for very small creatures moving through them. The sun does not care, the sand does not care. The sky, enormous and bleached nearly white at the horizon, does not care at all. You are alive and small, and the desert will outlast everything about you, including whatever you think you're doing and whatever you thought you were before you got here. Ellie had always found this clarifying rather than frightening. The desert asked nothing from him, did not require him to be what he had been or explain what he had done, or account for the years between Eleanor's hands pressing the wallet into his, and this particular Tuesday in August, with 10 fewer silver dollars and one more reason to keep walking. The desert was the closest thing to neutral ground he had found. He walked Wren, the younger sister, went down first, middle of the afternoon, heat at its full brutal height. She simply stopped in the way that bodies stop when they have been asking too much of themselves for too long and have finally presented the bill. No drama, no warning. Her knees hit the sand and she stayed there, broad shoulders trembling, lips cracked and white, hands pressed flat against the ground, as though trying to push the heat back down into the earth. Nara dropped beside her. Instantly, they spoke in Apache. Quick, low, practical. Nara's hand on her sister's back pressing in slow circles. Wren's head down, breathing with deliberate effort, the way you breathe when breathing has stopped being automatic. Eli stopped, 30 yards back. He unscrewed the canteen from his belt, set it down in the sand space between himself and them, stepped back 6 more paces, and waited. He did not call out, did not gesture, did not approach, just waited. Nara looked at him, at the canteen. At him again. The expression on her face was not gratitude. It was something more complicated and more honest than gratitude. The expression of someone recalculating a problem they thought they'd already solved. She stood, walked to the canteen, picked it up, drank slowly, controlling the impulse to take too much, brought it back to Ren, held it while her sister drank. Then she screwed the cap back on and walked back toward Eli and held it out. Eli shook his head slightly. Keep it. She watched him for a moment. Why help us? Her voice was rough with thirst but steady, the steadiness of someone who has decided to ask the question directly. Because indirection costs too much energy in this heat. Eli looked at the horizon, red and gold and blazing, the kind of sunset that should be beautiful and is, but also looks like something ending. Because I failed to help my own family once, he said, and I've been trying to figure out what to do with that since. It was more than he'd said to anyone in months, maybe years. It came out without the protective flatness he usually kept around anything true. Nara was quiet. The wind moved between them, dragging sand in low ribbons across the ground. You burned a village, she said. Not a question. I was in the regiment that did, said Eli. That's not what I asked. A pause. Longer this time. The hawk was gone. The sky had started its slow shift toward evening purple. No, he said, I didn't burn it, but I was there. And being there and doing nothing, he stopped. I've had 5 years to decide if that's a difference that matters. What did you decide? I'm still deciding. Nara looked at him for a long time. Then she looked back at Ren, who had gotten to her feet, and was standing with her usual stillness, watching the horizon with the focused attention of someone who has learned to read empty spaces for what they contain. Nara turned back to Eli. You walk behind us, she said, not beside, not in behind. Understood. She turned and walked back to her sister. Eli walked behind them, north. The fire that night was small, a practical fire, just enough light to see by, just enough heat to push back the desert cold that arrived every night with the sudden completeness of a door slamming. The sand held warmth until it didn't, and then it let go of all of it instantly, and the temperature dropped 30 degrees, and the stars came out in numbers that always startled Eli. Even now, even after years of open sleeping, he built the fire without being invited to. It was just practical, and they accepted it on that basis. The 3 of them sat around it at roughly equal distances from the flame. Ren spoke first. She had not spoken since Dry Fork, had barely acknowledged Eli's existence with anything more than the edge of her peripheral vision. But now she sat across the fire and looked into it and spoke, slowly, like each word had to be loaded deliberately. We were not born to kill, she said. Ati looked at her. I know said something in him, he kept it internal. Ren continued. There was a military camp. They had been taking children, Apache children, taken from 3 different communities. She swallowed. 20 children. We got them out. But to get them out, we had to go through 4 soldiers who had done things to women from our people. She looked up from the fire for the first time, directly at Eli. We killed those 4 soldiers. And since then, there is no one who wants to hear the reason. Not the army, not the settlements, not even some of our own people, who think we brought attention down on everyone. She looked back into the fire. Everyone needs someone to blame. We are the available candidates. Eli sat with this. He put another stick on the fire, watched the flare. Let it settle, I know how that works, he said. Nara's head came up slightly. You, he gave a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Too dry for that. 1869, burn 69. They believed someone told the commanding officer. There were hostiles camped there. He stopped. Started again. When the smoke cleared. I had a wife and daughter. They were visiting her sister in that settlement. A long pause. The fire snapped. So I ran. because the regiment was going to say I'd been in contact with hostiles, because I'd married a woman from a Tejano family with Apache blood 3 generations back, and that was enough for certain people to call everything into question. I've been running since. The fire cracked. A long piece of wood shifted and sent a brief shower of sparks upward. Nara said quietly, "So you carry your own ghosts? They don't leave," he said. "They just go quiet when the wind blows." Wren looked at him across the fire. Something in her expression had changed. Not warmth exactly, but the particular quality of stillness that changes from hostile to considering. "The children," she said. "The 20 we rescued. We had to run before we could get them somewhere safe. The last we knew, they were moving north." Eli looked up. "How long ago?" 6 days, he calculated. Distance, pace, terrain for children moving without adults in August heat. They might still be moving, he said. "Might have found shelter, or not," said Nara. "Or not," he agreed. He poked the fire. Sparks rose and died. "North," he said. "North," said Nara. Above them, the stars were so many and so bright that the sky looked less like darkness than like a darkness that had something to say. Wren tilted her head back and looked up and said something in Apache, very quietly. Words addressed to the stars specifically, like she knew which ones to talk to. Eli did not understand the language, but he understood the tone. He'd heard it in his own head in the dark, in different words, directed upward with the same combination of exhaustion and stubborn insistence that the universe be something other than random. He looked at his hands in the firelight. The wallet was still in his coat pocket. Empty now. $10 lighter. He thought about Eleanor handing it to him. The weight of her hands over his. The specific warmth of that morning before everything. He did not let himself stay there long. He thought about North instead. About 20 children who might be moving through this desert right now in the dark, without water, without knowing that anyone was coming. Hold on, he thought. In the direction of those children he'd never met. In the direction of everything he couldn't bring back. Hold on. Someone is coming. He wasn't sure when he'd started being that someone, but the desert was neutral about reasons. You moved or you didn't, he would move. Morning arrived the way it always did in the desert, without negotiation. The sky went from black to purple to gold in under an hour, and the temperature went from freezing to merely brutal by the time they had packed up and started walking. Nara led. Wren walked beside her. Eli walked behind them at the same 30 yards. "Don't read too much into this," said the voice. "I'm not," said Sai. "You're following 2 women into the desert with no money, no plan, and a gun you don't load." "Yes, and you feel better than you have in 5 years. A pause. "Don't mention that part," said Eli. They had walked perhaps 3 hours into the morning when the sound reached them. Hooves coming from the south. Nara heard it first. Her hand went up, a quick, precise gesture that stopped both Wren and Eli without a word exchanged. She turned south, listened. Her expression ran through several calculations in the time it took Eli to unshoulder his rifle, which he then remembered he hadn't loaded. He loaded it now. The rider came over the ridgeline and stopped, tall, bearded, a good horse, well kept. Rifle slung across the back, but hands visible and clear on the reins. A man who knew how to arrive in a way that announced he could be dangerous without making the first move. Eli knew him. Douglas Vane. They had served together for 2 years, before everything, before the settlement, before Eli ran. Vane had been a good soldier in the technical sense. Precise, reliable, controlled, the kind of man who followed orders well and who asked the right questions afterward. When it was too late for the questions to do anything, Vane looked at Eli. Then at the 2 women. Then back at Eli. "I heard about you," he said. Gravels. The vet who cut loose some Apache women at a Dry Fork auction, a pause with no warmth in it. "What are you doing out here, Eli?" "Heading north," said Eli. With them. With them." Vane dismounted. This was either a gesture of peace or a tactical choice. Probably both. I've got a paper, Vane said. He did not reach for it yet. Order out of the district office. I'm supposed to bring in 2 Apache women wanted in connection with the killing of 4 soldiers at the northern camp. Nara said nothing. Ren said nothing. Eli said, And you're in the way. I'm just heading north. Eli, Douglas, a long pause. The desert breathed. Sand moved in small, quick shapes across the ground between them. Step aside, said Vane. This doesn't have to involve you. Eli didn't step aside. He wasn't sure exactly what he was doing. He wasn't sure he had a plan. He wasn't sure a plan would help here, because the situation had more variables than plans usually accounted for, and because there was something in Vane's face, under the professional flatness, that looked like a man who was hoping to be stopped. Is that you projecting? Said the voice. Maybe, said Eli. But keep watching. Then Nara moved. She stepped forward, past Eli, past the space between them. She stood 3 feet from Douglas Vane and looked down at him. She was 4 inches taller, and she used none of it aggressively, but all of it inevitably. And she reached into her belt and pulled out a small, dull-handled pistol and pressed it to the side of her own head. The sound of Douglas Vane's breath stopping was audible. Nara. Sharp and low, then shoot me first, said Nara, to Vane directly, without performance, because I will not let you use the man who freed us to destroy us. Shoot me first. Or put the order away. Vane stared at her. His hand was not on his rifle. Something was happening on his face that Eli recognized, because he'd felt it himself. The moment of understanding that the equation has more terms than you accounted for, that the situation has a kind of logic to it that you cannot argue with because it is not made of words. He looked at Nara's face. He looked at the pistol. He looked at something that was not any of them, something behind them, or inside him, or somewhere in the middle distance where all decisions lived. He lowered his head. Put it away, he said, quietly. Defeat was not the word for it. Something more specific and harder to name. Nara held a moment longer. Then she lowered the pistol and returned it to her belt. Vane looked at Eli. Others will come. I know, said Eli. This doesn't end here. I know that too, Vane remounted. He looked at all 3 of them for one long moment. You always did make everything harder than it had to be, he said to Eli, but the edge was gone from it. What was left underneath sounded almost like the memory of respect. He turned his horse and rode south. The sound of hooves faded. The desert returned to its usual silence. Eli stood without moving, his rifle still in his hands. He realized his heart was going faster than usual, and his hands were not entirely steady, and this was the most alive he had felt in 5 years, which was both embarrassing and clarifying. He looked at Nara. She was already facing north. Ren says the children would have moved along the old river road, she said. As though the last 5 minutes had been simply a weather event to be waited out and moved past. Then that's where we go, said Eli. Ren had already started walking. Eli fell into step, not 30 yards behind this time. 15, neither woman said anything about it. By late afternoon they had picked up the old river road, a name that required optimism, since the river had been dry for 6 years, and what remained was a slightly lower depression in the ground than the surrounding desert, marked by scrub brush and the occasional bleached bone of something that had trusted the road too much. But it was a direction, and there were footprints, small ones, pressed into patches of dried mud near where the water table came closest to the surface. Multiple children, moving in a loose group, some barefoot, some with the thin-soled marks of soft shoes or wrapped feet. Ren crouched over the prints. Her face did something that was not quite emotion, but was too particular to be neutral. 6 days old, she said. Maybe 5, in the shadow patches. They were moving fast, said Nara, as fast as children can, looked at the line of prints heading north into the early evening light. 20 children in the August desert for 5 or 6 days. Without adults. Without. He stopped himself from finishing that sentence. We move faster, he said. They moved faster. The light was failing when they found the cave, a narrow cleft in a sandstone ridge, barely visible until you were nearly on top of it. But there was the smell. Wood smoke, faint but present, and underneath it the particular smell of many small bodies huddled close in an enclosed space. The smell of children who had been afraid and tired for a long time. Eli stopped at the entrance. "Don't let me go in first," he said to Nara quietly. She looked at him. Understood, she went first. The cave was dark and the fire inside was very small, the controlled, minimal fire of someone who had learned to be careful with resources and with visibility. It cast just enough light to see by. 20 children, pressed against the walls, against each other, ages ranging from roughly 6 to perhaps 12, clothes torn, faces drawn, eyes that had learned to track adult movement before deciding anything else. Every set of eyes locked onto Nara and Ren the moment they entered, and then something happened to those eyes, not relief. Too sudden for that. Something before relief. Something more like the moment when you have been holding your breath for so long that you have started to believe air might not actually exist, and then someone opens a window, the possibility of relief. One child, a girl perhaps 8 years old, thin, in the way of a child who has not eaten enough for weeks, was lying against the far wall. Her breathing was audible from the entrance, labored. Her forehead, when Ren pressed her hand to it, was hot enough to be frightening. "High fever," said Ren. She pulled the blanket from her own shoulders and laid it over the girl. Her voice was deep and certain and gentle. "You're all right now. Someone is here." Eli knelt at the entrance, pulled his coat off, tore a strip from the lining, found a child near him with a wrapped foot, an old wound improperly tended. He started cleaning and rebinding it without asking, because asking took time, and this was not about permission but about need. The child, a boy 10 or 11, with watchful dark eyes and a set to his jaw that suggested he had appointed himself responsible for everything he couldn't control, watched Eli's hands, did not move away, did not speak, watched Eli worked. Around the small fire, Nara moved from child to child, speaking low Apache, getting answers, building a picture of what had happened over 6 days. Ren stayed with the feverish girl, monitoring her breathing, managing the blanket, speaking to her in a continuous quiet murmur. Eli looked at the children's faces in the firelight. They were small. They were worn down to something that shouldn't be visible in a child's face. The particular look of someone who has understood that adults cannot always protect them, that the world is larger and less manageable than they were initially informed. He thought about his daughter, 4 years old when she died. She had not had long enough to learn what these children now knew. He thought about this briefly, and then he put it somewhere. It could stay quiet and did not move his hands from what they were doing. This time, he thought. The same thing he had thought in the desert, with the stars above him and north in front of him. This time, nobody dies. One of the younger children had made her way across the cave floor and was now sitting approximately 6 inches from Eli's left knee, watching him wrap the older boy's foot with dark, enormous, absolutely unapologetic eyes. He looked at her. She looked at him. He kept rapping. She stayed where she was. Nara, across the fire, was watching this. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes stayed on Eli's hands for a long moment, in the way that you watch something when you are deciding whether it is true. She looked away. Eli finished the bandage. He looked at the older, watchful boy in front of him. The boy had said nothing throughout, had not helped or resisted, had simply watched with a precision that missed very little. Eli nodded once. The boy, after a moment, nodded back. Outside desert night had fully arrived, cold and clear and enormous. The stars above the canyon ridge were very bright. Inside the small cave, the fire burned low and steady. 20 children breathed in gradually slowing rhythms of exhaustion meeting safety. Nara sat near the entrance beside Eli, close enough to speak quietly. "You sound like an Apache," she said. Not a compliment exactly. More like a precise observation. Eli shook his head. I just sound like a father. A pause. The fire shifted. Ren adjusted the blanket on the feverish girl without waking her. Nara looked at the children along the cave walls. We find them shelter tomorrow, she said. Proper shelter. Someone who will take them. I know a direction, said Eli. Maybe 2 days north. A trading post. A woman named Harriet Voss. I've heard she. I know Harriet Voss, said Nara. Something crossed her face. Quick, she is complicated. Most useful people are. Nara looked at him. Something turned in her expression that was not the lock this time, the door. Just slightly. 2 days, she said. 2 days, said Eli. Above them, thunder rolled somewhere distant. A storm moving in off the mountains. The children, one by one, had found their way to sleep. Eli sat with his back against the cold stone and listened to the sound of 20 small people breathing. In, out, in. The world asking nothing more complicated than that. The morning they left the cave, the sky was the color of a bruise healing, purple at the edges, gold trying to push through. The kind of sky that looks like it's been through something and is deciding whether to recover. 20 children filed out of the cave mouth into the early light, silent, organized in the way that children become organized when chaos has been their primary teacher. Not because anyone told them to line up or stay close, but because they had learned, in the hard, specific way of experience, that staying together was the variable that mattered most. Ren led from the front. Nara walked the middle. Eli walked at the back. He had been counting the children all night without meaning to, through every shift of the fire, every small movement in the dark. 20. Always 20. He counted them now in the thin morning light, still 20. He exhaled. The feverish girl was walking under her own power this morning. Slow, deliberate. One of the older girls had positioned herself at the smaller girl's left side, with the particular combination of practicality and tenderness that older sisters develop without being taught. She held the smaller girl's hand and set the pace, and did not look at anyone for approval. Eli watched this. He put it somewhere that could stay quiet. North, the boy who watched everything, was named Colt. Eli didn't know this on the first day. On the first day, Colt was simply the one who hadn't moved away, but also hadn't moved closer. The one who sat at a specific distance and maintained it with the precision of a surveyor. Close enough to see everything, far enough to dispute being there at all. On the second day of walking, Eli dropped his canteen, not on purpose. His hand caught wrong on his belt, and the canteen hit the ground and rolled 4 feet and stopped against a rock. Colt picked it up. He held it out without making eye contact, like it was a transaction with no relationship attached to it. Eli took it. Thank you, he said. Colt said nothing, but he walked approximately 6 feet closer for the rest of the afternoon. Don't make anything of that, said the voice. I'm not making anything, said Eli. You're making everything of it, and you know it. Eli screwed the cap back on and kept walking, 6 feet closer. Fine. The desert changed as they went north. Less sand, more stone. The ground shifted from the flat burning expanse of the lower basin to broken terrain, ridges of red sandstone, dry creek beds that traced the memory of water, juniper trees appearing in clusters as the elevation climbed in slow increments. The heat remained total, but there was shade now in the narrower passages between rocks. Brief shade, enough to matter. Nara navigated as though she had walked this specific ground before, which she might have. Eli did not ask. He watched her read the terrain, a tilt of the head at a fork in a dry creek bed, a pause at a ridge line to assess what the far side looked like before committing, and he understood that he was watching a different kind of knowledge than the kind that came from maps. This was the knowledge of someone who had learned the land before anyone put names on it. Ren managed the children's pace with no visible effort. She never raised her voice. She simply adjusted her own walking speed in ways that pulled the group into shape the way a current shapes water, without announcing itself, just by existing. When one of the younger children began to fall behind, Ren would drift back until the child caught up and then drift forward again. Seamless, Colt walked at the back with Eli now, still not talking. That was fine. They found the tracks on the afternoon of the second day. Not children's tracks. Adult, heavy-booted, multiple riders dismounted, moving on foot around the perimeter of a campsite that was no longer occupied. Nara crouched over the marks in a patch of dried mud near a rock overhang. She studied them thoroughly and without rushing. 2 days old, she said. 4 men, maybe 5. Looking for something, said Ren. Not a question, looking for something they didn't find, said Nara. Or they would have stayed. Ellie looked at the tracks. Then at the campsite. Then at the country to the north. They'll circle back, he said. Yes, said Nara. How far to the trading post? At this pace. Tomorrow noon. Maybe later with the children. Ellie looked at the children. 20 of them dispersed in small groups among the rocks of the overhang, making themselves small and quiet, in the instinctive way they had. The way animals go still in uncertain territory. Colt was watching the horizon where the tracks led. His jaw was set in the way that 10-year-old jaws set when they are carrying things they shouldn't have to carry. We keep moving, said Eli. Nara looked at him, then at the tracks. Then she stood. We keep moving, she said. Harriet Voss's trading post appeared at high noon on the 3rd day. It sat in a low valley where 2 dry creek beds met, sheltered on the north side by a sandstone wall, and on the west by a stand of cottonwood trees that had no business surviving here, but had apparently decided to anyway. The buildings were timber and adobe, a main trading house, a long low barn, a smaller structure behind that might have been a smokehouse or a storage room or both. There was a well. There was a kitchen garden, showing the grim determination of someone who planted things in the desert, not because it was sensible, but because it was necessary. Smoke from the chimney. Thin, late morning fire banked down. Someone was home. Nara slowed before they came fully into view of the post. Harriet Voss, she said, not to Eli specifically. To the space between them. You said complicated, said Eli. Her husband was Reginald Voss. A pause, Colonel. 5th District. Ellie went still. He knew every soldier who had served next New Mexico in 1869 knew that name. Colonel Reginald Voss had commanded the operation that had. The operation that. He knew that name. She stayed, said Nara, after he died. She stayed here, and she opened the post, and she trades with Apache, which some people would call conscience. A pause. And some people would call something else.
What do you call it?
Said Eli. Nara looked at the trading post for a long moment, at the smoke from the chimney, at the kitchen garden with its impossible persistence. I call it none of my business what it is, she said. The children need shelter, and she is the only one in 2 days' ride who will give it. She walked toward the post. Ellie followed. Harriet Voss came out onto the porch before they reached the gate. She was a tall woman. Late 50s. Silver hair pulled back severely from a face that might have been beautiful once and had become something better, interesting. All the softness refined out of it, leaving the structure that mattered. Blue eyes that moved across the approaching group with the rapid inventory of someone accustomed to assessing situations quickly. She saw 2 Apache women, 20 children, 1 white man in a cavalry coat carrying no obvious money and an unloaded expression. She pressed her hand to her chest for exactly 2 seconds. Then she straightened. How many need water, she said. Not a question, all of them, said Nara. Anyone sick? 1. Fever, 3 days. Responding, Harriet looked at Eli, direct. The kind of look that takes stock without being impolite about it. You're the one from Dry Fork, she said. Ellie blinked. News travels in this desert. Fast news is the only kind. She pushed the gate open. Bring them inside. The trading post interior was cool and dim and smelled of pine resin and dried herbs and something faintly medicinal. The main room was large, shelves of goods, a long table, 2 benches, an iron stove in the corner putting out the last of a morning fire. Harriet moved through the children with the confidence of someone who had done this before. Not this exact situation, but something like it. She brought water. Honey stirred into it for the younger ones. She examined the feverish girl's forehead with a dry, practiced hand and said she needs one more day of rest and she'll be over it. She unwrapped the bandage Eli had made from his coat lining, examined the wound underneath with a frown that was professional rather than alarmed, and rebandaged it with actual clean cloth. The children sat where they were put and ate what they were given with the focused seriousness of people who had learned not to take food for granted. Colt sat against the far wall, back straight, eyes moving. Eli sat near the door, same posture, eyes. Said nothing. Nothing. But there was something in the brief glance she exchanged with Nara that in another situation might have been called amusement. Late afternoon, the children were sleeping, most of them wherever they had found space, on the benches. On blankets Harriet had produced from a cedar chest, with the purposeful efficiency of a woman who had been preparing for contingencies for some time. The feverish girl was on a cot in the back room, breathing evenly. Harriet came out of the back room and found Eli at the table with a cup of coffee. She sat across from him. She did not make small talk, Eli Cade. She said, "Yes, my husband mentioned you." The coffee stopped halfway to his mouth. "Colonel Voss mentioned me. In his journal." She folded her hands on the table. He was a meticulous journal keeper. It was the most organized thing about him. A pause. "He mentioned you in the entry from March of 1869. 2 months before the operation." Eli put the cup down. His hands were steady. "He made sure of that." "What did it say?" he said. Harriet looked at him for a moment. Then she stood and went to the back of the room and came back with a journal. Dark brown leather, the corners worn soft from years of handling. She opened it to a page marked with a strip of cloth and set it on the table in front of him. He read. The handwriting was small and precise, military. The entry was dated March 7, 1869. Cade continues to raise objections to the Northern Sweep Plan. He is not wrong in his assessment of the intelligence. The source is unreliable at best, fabricated at worst, but he is also a cavalryman, and he will follow the order when it comes. That is the nature of this institution, and I have long since made my peace with what that means. What Cade has not yet made his peace with is the same. I admire it will cost him. He turned the page. Found the entry from May. The sweep is done. Cade refused to fire. I ordered it anyway. The outcome. I will not describe it here because description makes it permanent in a way I find I cannot endure tonight. What I will say is that Cade refused, and I did not, and what happens from this point forward belongs to my account, not his. I will not pursue disciplinary action. He will leave the regiment. I expect this. I do not blame him. Eli read it twice, then he sat for a long time without moving. The journal sat on the table between them. Open. Patient. He refused to fire. I ordered it anyway. What happens from this point forward belongs to my account, not his. 5 years. 5 years of waking up inside that smoke, of Eleanor's face in it, of his daughter's hand. 5 years of carrying the certainty that being there made him responsible for all of it. That standing in that regiment on that ground wearing that coat was the same as pulling the trigger. That he had no right to anything good because good things happened to people who had not been where he was. And Colonel Reginald Voss had sat in his tent on the night of that operation and written in his small, precise handwriting. What happens from this point forward belongs to my account, not his. The coffee in the cup had gone cold. Harriet had not moved. She was watching him with the particular patience of someone who has been waiting a long time for a particular conversation to happen and has accepted that patience is the only tool available. He died in 1872, she said. Fever. He had been sick for a year and did not tell anyone, including me, until it was near the end. A pause. He made me promise to find the journal a use. He didn't specify. I think he meant this. She looked at the journal. I think he meant someone like you. Ellie's hands were on the table in front of him. He was looking at them. I had a wife, he said, Eleanor, and a daughter. They were in that settlement. I know, said Harriet quietly. He wrote about that too later, when he found out. A long pause. There is a page, I'll show you if you want. Or I can just tell you what it says. Tell me, it says, I have done an irreversible thing, and Cade is paying the price of it. This is the unbearable part. Not what I did. What I made him carry by doing it. The stove in the corner made a small settling sound as the fire inside it shifted. Eli picked up the cold coffee and drank it. He knew, said something in him. He knew, and he carried it, and I carried it. And neither of us knew the other one was carrying it. 5 years. He put the cup down. He breathed. Harriet said very carefully, You are not the man who burned that settlement, Eli Cade. You are the man who refused to. He looked at her. She looked back at him steadily. My husband was a complicated person, she said, and a coward in the end, and he did something unforgivable. I can't fix any of that, but I can show you this journal. And I can tell you that there is a difference between being there and doing it, and that difference matters, and that you have spent 5 years not knowing that someone wrote it down. Ellie said nothing, which was different from having nothing to say. He pushed back from the table, walked to the door, stood on the porch in the long, late afternoon light. The valley was golden. The cottonwood trees threw long shadows east. Somewhere behind him, 20 children were sleeping. He breathed in, out, in. The air did not taste like smoke. He stood there long enough that the sun moved visibly. He was still there when Nara came out of the post behind him. She stood at his right with the distance she had maintained since Dry Fork. Close enough to speak at a normal volume. Far enough to be separate, she told you, said Nara. Yes. A pause. Do you know? Said Eli. No, I knew about Colonel Voss. I did not know about the journal. She looked at the valley. My mother was in that settlement. The words landed like a stone into still water. Eli turned to look at her. She was not looking at him. Her eyes were on the cottonwood trees, the long shadows. The way the light hit the sandstone wall behind the post and turned it the color of embers. She got out, said Nara, before it started. She was with a group that had left the night before, but our grandmother did not get out. A pause. So I know the name Voss. I have known it my entire adult life. And you came here anyway, said Eli. The children needed shelter. Simple. Flat, not forgiving, not condemning, just true. I make one choice at a time. This choice was the children, Nara. Don't, she said. Not sharp, carp, just clear. Don't apologize for him. You didn't do it. And I don't need an apology from someone who didn't do it. I've had enough of people being sorry on behalf of other people. It doesn't do anything, she paused. What does something is what you're doing now. What you did in Dry Fork. What you've done for 3 days in this desert. She finally looked at him. That does something. Ellie looked back at her. The light was extraordinary. The kind of desert evening light that makes everything look like it has been waiting to be seen correctly, and this is finally the moment. He looked terrible in it, probably. 5 years of desert living, a cavalry coat with a piece missing from the lining, grey at the temples and lines that had no particular business being where they were. Nara looked at him the way she looked at the desert when she was reading it, like it had information, like she was deciding what the information meant. Your wife, she said? Eleanor. What was she like? Not a question that expected a short answer. Something more specific. The question of someone who wants to understand a thing fully before deciding what it means to them. So Eli told her. He told her about Eleanor's hands, which were always slightly too cold even in summer. About the way she laughed, which started silent, shoulders shaking first, sound arriving 2 seconds later. About how she had been 5 years older than him and had made him feel, for the first time in his life, like catching up was possible. About their daughter, who had been 4 years old and had her mother's 2 cold hands and her father's grey eyes, and had called the horse the big walking dog until the day she died. He talked. Nara listened. The sun finished setting. Stars appeared. When he stopped talking, it was fully dark, and the inside of the trading post was lit with oil lamps that threw to warm, yellow light through the windows. Nara said, "She sounds like someone worth carrying." "She is," said Eli. "There's a difference," said Nara, "between carrying someone and being buried by them." He looked at her. "I know that now," he said. "I didn't until recently." "When recently?" "Dry Fork," he said. "August." Nara looked at the stars for a moment. Then she turned and went inside. Eli stayed on the porch for another minute. He put his hand in his pocket and touched the leather wallet. Empty, lighter than it had ever been. Good. The trouble came at dawn. Eli heard the hooves before anyone else, which was not exceptional. He had been awake all night. He had the rifle in his hands and was at the edge of the porch before the sound resolved into a number and a direction. 3 horses, coming fast from the south. He said one word into the sleeping post. Up, everyone moved. The children, remarkable creatures, came awake and went silent and small in the same motion, dispersing to the back of the room with a practiced speed that broke something in Eli's chest every time he saw it. No child should be this efficient at hiding. Wren was at the side window. Nara was at the door, beside Eli. Harriet was behind the counter with a rifle of her own that she handled with the comfort of someone who had not lived alone in this desert for 3 years by relying on charm. 3 riders came through the gate, Douglas Vane, and 2 men Eli didn't know, flanking him. Handfuls on their backs, not in their hands. Either a professional gesture of good faith or a tactical decision about first impressions, Vane dismounted. Eli stepped off the porch. They stood 10 feet apart in the growing dawn light. The valley was cold and quiet. The cottonwood leaves made their small sound in the first breath of morning wind. "You made better time than I expected," said Vane. "We had motivation," said Eli. 20 children's worth. Vane looked at the post, at Nara in the doorway. Back at... "There's a paper, Eli. It doesn't stop existing because you walked north. Who issued it? You know who issued it." "I want to hear you say it." Vane's jaw shifted. "District office. With backing from the congressional level. There's a senator who would like these events to disappear, along with anyone who witnessed them." "Which events?" said Eli. "You know which events. The children," said Eli. 20 children, taken from 3 communities. "That's not Douglas." Eli's voice did not rise. It went quieter, which was more effective. "I've been carrying a dead man's guilt for 5 years because I was there for something I didn't do. I am not interested in carrying a live man's guilt for something I am actively refusing to do. So let's be clear about what the paper says and who issued it." Vane looked at him. The 2 flanking riders were very still. "The paper," said Vane slowly, "has your name on it. And theirs." He did not look at the doorway, but they both knew what theirs meant. "Wanted for questioning regarding the deaths of 4 soldiers at the northern camp." "Questioning," said Eli. "That's what it says." "And what it means?" Vane said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Eli held the rifle in both hands. "Not aimed. Just present. I won't step aside, Douglas. Not this time. Then I'll go through." "Me," said Nara. She had come off the porch. She walked past Eli and stood between him and Vane in the cold morning light. 6 feet of her. Straight. Certain not this again said something in Eli. Except it wasn't panic. It was something else. Something that recognized that Nara was not doing this because she was out of options. She was doing it because she was making a specific choice, in the same way she had made the specific choice in the desert. One choice at a time. This was a choice. Vane stared at her. "Stand down," he said. "This isn't about you." "It is entirely about me," said Nara, "and about 20 children inside that building, and about a man behind me who refused to fire when your colonel ordered it, and has been blamed for the firing ever since." Her voice did not shake, not a tremor. "So if you want to take anyone from this valley today, Douglas Vane, you tell me exactly what you're taking them for, and exactly who sent you. Out loud, in front of witnesses, Vane looked at her. He looked at the two flanking riders. He looked at the building, and then something happened that had nothing to do with Nara's words. Though they had landed, something that had been building, maybe since the desert 3 days ago, since a pistol held to a temple, since a question he hadn't been able to answer, Vane's eyes moved to the doorway of the post, where Colt was standing. Colt had come to the door. The boy who was not supposed to be visible, who had been perfectly efficient at making himself invisible when it mattered. But he was standing in the doorway now, arms at his sides, looking at Vane with the specific expression of a child who is not afraid because he has already been through the thing that was supposed to make him afraid and came out the other side. Vane went very still. His hand went to his chest, slowly, to the inside pocket of his coat. He pulled out a photograph, small, worn at the corners, the image faded with handling. A family, a man, a woman, a small boy. He looked at the photograph. He looked at Colt. Ellie watched Vane's face go through something he had no name for. It was not guilt exactly, because guilt was something you felt about choices. This was something that happened before choice. Before language, his name, said Vane very quietly. Not to Eli, not to Nara. To the air between himself and the doorway where Colt was standing. Colt, said Eli. Vane's throat moved. His father, said Vane. His father was, there was a patrol 1871 south of the ridge. And he stopped. I have had this photograph for 3 years. I took it. And I kept it because I couldn't. He stopped again. I couldn't throw it away, and I couldn't figure out what to do with it, and I have been carrying it, and I don't. He crossed the 10 feet between himself and the doorway. He crouched down in front of Colt. Eye level. The photograph held out. Colt looked at it. He had not seen this photograph before. That was clear, but he knew the people in it. Of course he knew the people in it. It was written on his face in the way that certain things are written. Not in expression, but underneath expression. In the structure of the face itself. In the way you know a river even when it's dry, because the shape of the land tells you where the water was. Colt took the photograph. He held it with both hands and looked at it and said nothing. Vane stood. He looked at Eli. The flanking riders are hired guns, he said. They'll go where the money says. He looked at the 2 men on horseback. Ride back. Tell the district office the trail went cold north of Dry Fork. One of the riders started to object. The trail, said Vane, precisely, went cold. A pause. The rider looked at his companion, looked at the situation, looked at 20 children, visible through the window of the trading post, and did a private calculation that ended in the direction of no further involvement. They rode. Vane stood alone in the valley with his horse and the slowly brightening morning. He looked at Eli. There'll be more paper, he said. From higher than the district office, I know. You need something that goes higher than paper. I know, said Eli. Think I have it. Harriet Voss appeared in the doorway behind Colt. She was holding a journal with dark brown leather corners and had the expression of a woman who has been waiting for the appropriate moment for 3 years and has decided this is it. Vane looked at the journal. He knew what it was. That was clear, he told you. He wrote it down, said Harriet. And I have the original, and I know where to send it. Vane looked at the journal for a long moment, then at the valley, then at Colt, who was still holding the photograph with both hands. Send it, said Remounted. Paused. Eli, something in his voice. Old, pre-war old, from before they were what this decade had made them. That village. 1869. For what it's worth. I always knew it was wrong. I know you did, said Eli. I just didn't. I know, said Eli. I didn't either. Not enough. Vane looked at him for a final moment. Then he rode south, and the valley went quiet, and the cottonwood trees made their small sound, and the morning light came fully into the sky, and it was gold and clear, and nothing like smoke at all. Inside, the children woke properly. The feverish girl, whose name Eli finally learned was Dyer, sat up on the cot and asked for water and then food, in that order, which Harriet pronounced an excellent sign and moved immediately to provide. Colt sat at the long table with the photograph in front of him. He had not said anything since Vane rode away. He was doing the thing that children do with an enormous thing, sitting with it, letting it exist at its actual size, rather than trying to compress it into something manageable. Eli sat at the other end of the table. He was doing the same thing, more or less. After a while, Colt looked up. "Did you know my father?" he said. Not the way Vane had asked it. The way a child asks something when they're not sure they want the answer, but have decided they need to ask anyway. "No," said Eli. "I didn't serve in that regiment." Colt nodded. Looked back at the photograph. "He called me Colt because of a horse he had once," the boy said. He said. The horse was the stubbornest, fastest thing he'd ever seen, and it always found its way back. A pause. "That's a good name," said Eli. Colt looked at him with the evaluating precision that was simply his natural mode of engaging with the world. "You smell like you've been in a desert for a long time," said Colt. 3 weeks at minimum," said Eli. "Possibly longer. You should probably clean up." "Probably?" "Definitely," said Colt. "Not probably." Looked at him. Colt looked back. Then Colt slid the photograph across the table. Ellie looked down at it. "The family." The small boy. "I don't need it anymore," said Colt. "I know what they look like." He stood up and went to find food. Eli sat with the photograph. He put it in his coat pocket, where the wallet was. $10 empty worth of leather and memory. Something in the weight of the coat changed. Not lighter. Different. Harriet sent the journal north by a rider she trusted to Santa Fe that afternoon. She had copied out the specific pages in her own clear handwriting, because the original could not leave her possession yet, and because copies in a second hand were harder to dismiss as forgery. She also wrote a letter. It was addressed to the Federal Circuit Office, and it was, Eli could see from the 3 sentences she read aloud, the letter of a woman who had been composing it in her mind for 3 years and had never been surer of any words in her life. "Will it work?" said Wren from the window. Not skeptically, practically, weighing likelihood. "It won't be fast," said Harriet. "And something is how things start." Wren considered this. "Yes," she said finally, "something is how things start." That evening, after the children had eaten and been settled, and the fire in the stove had burned to good reliable coals, Eli sat on the porch. The stars were out in their full desert numbers. More than any sky needed, Nara came out. She sat beside him, not at her customary distance, beside him. The porch step was narrow, and that was the only geometry available. Neither of them spoke for a while. The night made its sounds whined in the cottonwood. Something small moving in the kitchen garden with small efficient sounds. "Tomorrow," said Nara. "Tomorrow," said Eli. "Wren will take the children west. There is a community 2 days from here. People who will take them. And you?" A pause. "The paper is real, Eli. Even if the journal counters it, the paper is real until someone official says otherwise, which takes months. Or years." She paused. "I can't stay near a fixed location while that's in play, I know, so I will move. And Wren will move. And at some point, when the paper is resolved. There's a direction I've been thinking about," said Eli. "North of here, past the ridge, about 2 days, there's a valley I passed through 4 years ago. Timber, a stream that actually runs most of the year. Far enough from the district office to be impractical for them. Close enough to the main road to be livable." Nara looked at him. "You've been thinking about this for a while," she said. 4 hours, said Eli. "Since Vane rode out, that's not a while. It's 4 hours longer than I've planned anything in 5 years." Nara looked at the stars. "A valley," she said. "It would need work. The cabin that was there was in poor repair 4 years ago, which means it's probably down by now. Would need to be rebuilt. Can you build a cabin?" "I can build half a cabin," said Eli, "which is exactly as useful as it sounds." Nara made a sound. It was very quiet, and it didn't last long, and it was absolutely, unmistakably, almost laughter. Eli turned to look at her. She was not laughing. Her expression was composed as it always was. But there was something in it that hadn't been there in Dry Fork. Something that had been building in increments so small they were only visible now from the other side of 3 days, and a desert, and a valley, and a porch in the August dark. "When the paper is resolved," she said, "I will come and evaluate this half-a-cabin fare," said Eli. "I am a very good judge of construction quality, I believe that entirely, and if it's as bad as you suggest, it will be. Then we will rebuild it. We," said something in Eli. "Don't," said no, said Eli. But he was smiling, slightly, in the way of a man who has been in a desert for 5 years and has forgotten what a direction feels like, and has just, unexpectedly, in the dark on a porch in a valley in August, been handed one, a direction, north, something for now was everything. Late that night, when the post was quiet and the children were sleeping, and Harriet had gone to her room, and Wren had taken the first watch at the south gate, Eli found something in Vane's coat pocket. Vane had left his coat on the fence post when he remounted. Taken it off, left it without exception, and ridden south. Eli had picked it up without thinking. In the inner pocket, folded 4 times, was a page. Not official paper, personal paper, the kind you write on when you're writing for yourself, not for record. Vane's handwriting, small, careful. "I have been following orders my entire adult life, and I am trying to remember if there was a point at which I chose that, or if it simply happened around me. I think it simply happened. Which is, I suspect, the same as choosing the boy in the photograph. If he is alive somewhere, I hope he does not know my name, and I hope someone is teaching him that being there and doing it are not the same thing. That the difference matters. That someone thought to write it down. Ellie read it, folded it back, went inside, added it to the coat pocket that had the photograph and the empty wallet, lay down on the floor near the fire among the children, who shifted and breathed and occasionally made small sounds in their sleep that were not nightmares but were not entirely peaceful either, listened to them. In out, 20 small sets of lungs doing the most ordinary thing in the world. He closed his eyes. The smoke did not come, just the dark, and the breathing, and the fire going slowly to coals, and tomorrow ahead and north, still something. The morning they left the trading post, the sky was the color of a bruise healing, purple at the edges, gold trying to push through. Wren left first with the children, 19 of them moving west in a loose cluster. Wren at the front, 2 of the older children, flanking the younger ones by some arrangement that appeared to have organized itself overnight without adult involvement. Dyer was in the middle, walking steadily, the fever entirely gone, as if it had simply decided its business was concluded. Colt went last. He stopped at the gate and looked back at Eli, then at Nara, then at Eli again. "Don't break anything before I get back," he said. "I'll try," said Eli. "Try harder than that." He turned and walked west, and then it was quiet. Harriet went inside to keep her post. She had a life here, a purpose. She had made her peace with this valley a long time ago, and was continuing to live it, which left Eli and Nara standing at the gate of Harriet Voss's trading post in the August noon sun, saying nothing. Because there was a great deal to say, and neither of them was particularly good at saying it in any direct or efficient way, which was either a problem or a thing they had in common. Eli was uncertain which. She was leaving that afternoon, moving east and then north, staying off the main roads, keeping moving until the paper was resolved and it was safe to stop. She had a route. She had a plan. Of course she had a plan. Eli had half a cabin in an imaginary valley. 1 man, 1 horse, 1 coat with a strip missing from the lining. An empty wallet, a stranger's photograph, a dead man's confession, and a direction that had only come into existence 8 days ago when he'd laid $10 silver on a table in Dry Fork and not thought about it first. "You should say something," said the voice. Yes, said Eli. Something real, not tactical, not practical. I know, because she's leaving this afternoon and you. I know, he said. I know. He was still standing at the gate. She was standing 6 feet from him, looking north. Nakra. She looked at him, and he did not say the tactical thing, or the practical thing, or the thing about the valley, or the paper, or the timeline, or any of the sensible, organized information he had been marshalling in his head for the last 45 minutes. He said, "What did your daughter look like?" She went absolutely still. And then, slowly, that has been shut a long time, opening with deliberate care, she said, "I don't have a daughter, I know." He paused. "I meant when you were young. What did you look like?" She looked at him for a long moment, recalibrating. "Why?" she said. "Because I've been telling you about Eleanor and my daughter for 2 days, and I don't know anything about you before Dry Fork." He paused. "And I'd like to." The desert made its sound, whined in the distance. Something small and fast moving through the scrub brush south of the gate. Nara looked at the north horizon. "I was taller than everyone by the time I was 10, she said, which was not convenient. My mother said I was built like a door and took up the same amount of space in a room." A pause. She meant it as a compliment. "It is a compliment. I know that now." Another pause. "I was very serious as a child." Wren was the fast one, the one who disappeared over ridgelines and came back 3 hours later with some impractical piece of information she'd found. I was the one who stayed and helped and organized and made sure things worked. She looked at her hands. "I have been doing that my entire life, staying, helping, making sure things work, and then running," said Eli, "when staying became impossible. And then running," she agreed. "Kye, it is exhausting," she said. "Not the running, the part before, the part where you have decided that staying and helping and organizing is who you are, and then the world removes the thing you were staying for." "Yes," said Eli, "and you have to figure out what you are when the reason is gone." "Yes." She looked at him. He looked at her. The gate was between them. He was on the outside, she was on the inside. "Eli Cade," she said. "Nara," he said, "I am going to be honest with you, please. I do not know what this is, what we are, what the last 8 days were. I know what they felt like, but I've been wrong about what things felt like before, and I have learned to be careful." "That's fair," said Eli. "It's not about fair. It's about... I have a long history of being very certain about things that turned out to be complicated. Nara, what? I have an empty wallet, half a cabin, a 10-year-old who has appointed himself in charge of my structural integrity, and I have..." He stopped. "Started again. I have been heading nowhere for 5 years, and for the first time in 5 years, I know exactly where I'm going and why." She waited. "That's you," he said, in case that was unclear. A pause, a very long pause. The wind moved between them. "That was not unclear," she said. "Good. It was also possibly the least romantic declaration I have ever heard. I'm out of practice. Clearly, I could try again. Please don't." But she was smiling. Not the corner of the mouth, not the almost, the full thing, brief, controlled, but genuine as the desert and twice as surprising. She put her hand on the gate. He put his hand on the other side of it. They stood like that for a moment, gate between them, hands almost touching. The trading post behind her and the desert behind him, and everything complicated and real and not yet resolved in every direction. "Come back," he said. "When it's safe. The valley will be there. You said the cabin is probably down. I'll rebuild it. Half of it I'll get better. You'll need to." She moved her hand, opened the gate, stepped through it past him, into the desert side. "Walk with me to the ridge." He walked with her to the ridge. They walked north together for 2 hours, not talking much, not needing to. The desert in early afternoon was the desert, relentless and golden and indifferent to everything except itself, and they moved through it the way they had moved through everything in the last 8 days. Side by side, same pace. Reading the same ground at the ridge, they stopped. Below, the valley where Harriet's post sat looked small. The cottonwood trees a smudge of green, the smoke from the chimney a thin line, improbable. Persisting. She'll be fine, said Eli. Meaning Wren, I know, said Nara. She has always been fine. It is the most annoying thing about her. Ellie looked at the eastern horizon, where Nara would go, where he would go. There's a stream, he said, in the valley. It runs from snowmelt off the northern peak. Cold even in August. The trees there are mostly pine. There's a meadow on the east-facing slope that would get morning sun. Nara looked north. Morning sun, she said. And Colt is going to want to sleep outside regardless of what the cabin situation is. He's that kind of person. Most people who grow up in the desert are. I'll need to figure out. There are children coming, if the community to the west takes some and not all. Or if they come back eventually, he stopped. I'm planning. I don't usually plan, I noticed. Is it alarming? She looked at him sideways. It is extremely alarming. Yes, because of the quality of the plan, or because you are planning around people, she said. Around specific people. Colt sleeping preferences. Morning sun. Children coming back. She paused. You are building something in your head that has other people's shapes in it. Yes, said Eli. 5 days ago you told me you hadn't had a direction. 5 days is a long time out here. She turned to look at him fully. The ridge behind them. The desert below. The sky enormous and blue and holding everything. When the paper is resolved, she said. When the paper is resolved, I will come and see this valley. Yes, and if the cabin is as structurally compromised as I expect, it will be worse. Then we will have to be practical about it completely. She looked at him. Eli, Nara, take care of yourself until then. I'll try. Try harder than that. Which was exactly what Colt had said this morning. At the gate, Ellie looked at her. She met his eyes. And for a moment on the ridge, with the desert below and the future uncertain in every specific way a future can be uncertain, paper and senators and months of waiting, and 2 days of building ahead, and 20 children who might circle back, and one 10-year-old who had promised to return. In all of that, in every bit of it, he felt specifically and completely that he was in the right place. That north, for the first time in 5 years, was not just a direction, it was a destination. She turned east, she walked. He watched until the desert took her, but this time, watching something go, he was not afraid, because she was not gone. She was just not here yet. He turned north, he walked. The valley. September 1874. 3 weeks later, the cabin was worse than he'd expected, which was saying something because he'd expected it to be bad. 2 walls standing. The roof entirely down, lying in the interior like a crumpled letter someone had given up on. The chimney somehow still upright, which was the kind of miracle that was more insulting than helpful. The chimney alone, standing with its stones intact, surrounded by comprehensive structural collapse. Eli stood in front of it for a long time. He looked at the chimney. The chimney stood there being fine. "You've got to be kidding me," said the voice. "No," said Eli. 2 walls, yes, and a chimney, I see it. This is what you told her you'd rebuild." "Yes, before she comes, presumably." "I know." He picked up the axe he'd bought in the small settlement 10 miles south, with the money he'd earned splitting fence posts. Again, always the fence posts, as though the universe had decided this was his assigned labor, and he went to find timber. The valley was everything he'd remembered. Stream running cold and clear off the northern peak. Pine trees on the slopes, their smell in the morning, something close to medicinal, close to clean. The meadow on the east-facing slope caught the first light and held it for 2 hours before the sun moved. In September, the mornings were cool. Not cold. The particular temperature of something deciding whether to be summer or fall, and taking its time about it. He worked not heroically. Not in the way of stories where the work montage is clean and triumphant, in the way of actual work, which is to say with sore hands and bad decisions, and sections that had to come down. Because they'd gone up wrong, and mornings where the progress from the previous day looked less impressive than it had in the dark. He was not a skilled builder, he was a persistent one, which was different and in the end more useful. He built. Colt arrived on a Tuesday, just appeared, over the southern ridge, on foot, which was impressive, and somewhat alarming given the distance. He had a pack on his back and the photograph in his pocket, and the expression of someone who has arrived exactly when they intended to and sees no reason to explain themselves. He looked at the cabin. The cabin was, at this point 3 weeks in, at approximately 60% completion. 2 full walls, 2 partial walls, half a roof. The chimney still standing, now connected to something instead of nothing. Colt looked at it for a long time. "It's better than I expected," he said. "Really?" said Eli. No, a pause. "But it's not as bad as the worst possibility. That's generous. I'm trying something new." He set his pack down, looked at the roof situation with an assessing eye. "You've got the joinery wrong on the northeast corner, I know. It'll let water in, I know. So why? Because I got it wrong and I haven't figured out how to fix it yet, and I was hoping someone with more construction knowledge would arrive." Colt looked at him. "I'm 10, said Colt. "You're observant," said Eli. "That's the relevant quality here." Colt looked at the corner. "You have to take out the 2 top courses and reset them," he said. "My uncle built in this style." I watched him, a pause. "I can show you. I was hoping you'd say that." They fixed the corner. It took 3 days and was genuinely unpleasant on the 2nd day. The section came down faster than expected, and Eli caught it with his shoulder, and the shoulder made a sound it should not have made. But it was fixed, and the northeast corner would not let in water. And on the 3rd day, when they stood back and looked at it, something in the shape of the building had resolved into something that looked, recognizably, like a place people could live. Colt put his hand on the repaired corner, flat palm, checking it the way his uncle must have checked it. "Good," he said, 1 word, but the way he said it, like an architect, like a person who has built things and knows what good means when you say it about a thing you built. Eli felt it in his chest. "Good," he agreed. October arrived. The fall in the valley was extraordinary. The aspens on the upper slopes turned gold and then orange and then a red so deep it looked editorial, like someone had made a decision about color and committed fully. The mornings went cold for real now. The stream ran lower but clearer. The pine smell sharpened in the cold air to something almost painful in its clarity. Eli and Colt built furniture. Uneven but serviceable benches. "A second sleeping platform in case," said the voice. "Yes," said Eli. In case of how many people, exactly?" "I don't know. That's why I'm using in case rather than for." "That's very careful of you." "I'm learning. The benches were better than the table. The second sleeping platform was better than the first." He was getting better. Colt watched all of this with his consistent evaluating attention and offered corrections when the corrections were necessary, which was often, and said nothing when they weren't, which was occasionally. In the evenings they ate by the fire. Colt had brought in his pack a small collection of objects that were clearly the things he considered worth carrying across 2 days of desert on foot. The photograph, a knife, a piece of some mineral that caught light in an interesting way, a small book of drawings, pages of faces and landscapes and animals, rendered in charcoal with an accuracy that was striking in a 10-year-old. "You draw," said Eli. "Sometimes these are good." "I know, no false modesty, no performance, just accurate self-assessment delivered plainly."
Will you draw this valley?
Colt looked around at the valley in the firelight, the dark shapes of the pines, the stars appearing over the ridge, the cabin with its repaired northeast corner. "When it's finished," he said. Eli nodded. "When it's done." "When?" The letter came in late October. Harriet sent it with a trader heading north on the main road, who delivered it to the small settlement 10 miles south, where the woman at the dry goods store sent a boy up with it. Eli read it on the porch step. Colt read it over his shoulder, because Colt had decided privacy was a concept that applied to some situations, and this was not one of them. The letter said the circuit office in Santa Fe had received the journal. The relevant pages were under review by a federal examiner. The senator's backing of the original order was being questioned in connection with a broader investigation into the conduct of the 5th District between 1868 and 1872. The examiner had indicated that withdrawal of the existing orders against Eli Cade was likely pending formal review completion, likely pending, which was not certain, but was something, was significantly more than nothing. Eli read it twice. Colt, likely. Yet, said Colt. Not certain, no, but more than nothing, yes. Colt stood up and went inside and came back with 2 tin cups and the canteen. He filled both cups, handed one to Eli, sat back down. They drank cold water from the stream. Not ceremonial, not dramatic. Just 2 people on a porch step in the October mountains drinking water, with a letter that said likely and meant something had shifted. She'll come when it's resolved, said Colt. Yes, so it needs to be resolved. The examiner works at his own pace. Can you write to him? I can write to Harriet and she can forward anything that might help. Colt nodded. Write to Harriet. Tell her about the journal entry about you refusing to fire, the specific date, and the entry about your wife. He paused. Details are what make things real to people who haven't lived them. Ellie looked at him. 10 years old. You're a remarkable person, said Eli. I know, said Colt. Also, the table is still uneven, I know. You should fix it. Tomorrow, today, Colt. It bothers me every meal. It bothers you every meal. Every single meal. Yes. Ellie stood up, went inside, fixed the table. Colt sat on the porch and looked at the valley and did not say, I told you so, because he was not that kind of person. He was, however, exactly satisfied, which was visible if you knew how to look. The valley. March 1875, the snow came in November and went in February, and left behind a valley that looked, in the first week of March, like something that had been waiting, green coming back, the stream running high and cold with snowmelt, the aspens bare but already showing the first suggestion of buds at their branch tips. Not leaves yet, just the intention of leaves. The promise, the cabin was finished, 4 walls, full roof. The chimney connected and functional and a genuine pleasure in the cold months, which was something Eli had not expected to feel about a chimney, and yet there it was. A table that was level, 3 benches, 2 sleeping platforms, a 4th wall that had taken longer than everything else because the timber had been difficult. And he'd done it 3 times before it was right, which meant Colt had watched him do it 3 times and said very little, which was its own kind of commentary. It was not a beautiful cabin, it was a solid one. Which was better? March 3rd. Eli was on the roof, patching a section that the snow had worked at, because snow was persistent in the way that water is persistent, finding the weakness and press on it without malice, just physics. When Colt said, "Someone's coming," his voice from below, flat, not alarmed, Ellie looked south, a figure on the ridge, tall, moving with a specific economy, the particular way of someone who has been to move through terrain for a long time and has made their peace with the distance. He stayed on the roof, he wasn't sure why. He stayed there while the figure came down from the ridge and crossed the lower meadow and stopped at the edge of the cleared ground around the cabin. Nara looked up at him on the roof. He looked down at her. She had traveled far, weeks of it, maybe more, in the way her coat sat, and the particular quality of her face, not tired exactly, weathered, the way rock is weathered, still entirely itself but marked by what it's been through. She looked at the cabin, the 4 walls, the full roof, the level table visible through the open door. "It's better than I expected," she said. And he, from the roof, with a hammer in his hand and pine pitch on his coat and 7 months of building behind him, felt something so straightforward and complete that it required no examination. He was home, not the building, not the valley, Not the specific patch of mountain he had been working for 7 months, but this moment. This woman standing at the edge of the cleared ground looking up at him with her evaluating, careful, completely honest eyes. "Home, come inside," he said. "The table's level. I'll believe it when I see it. You can check it yourself. I intend to." He climbed down from the roof. She checked the table, ran her hand across the surface, checked the legs, pushed down at the corners in sequence, stood back and looked at it from the side. "It's level," she said. "Yes," said Eli. "Better than I expected. You keep saying that." "It keeps being true." Colt, sitting on the bench, was watching this exchange with the expression of someone watching a performance they have seen in rehearsal and are now seeing for real. "He fixed it to 6 times, said Colt. 4 times, said Eli, 6-4 officially. The other 2 were adjustments. They were also fixes. Nara looked at Colt. Colt looked at Nara. Some kind of recognition passed between them that was quick and mutual, and excluded Eli entirely. Which was fine, which was actually more than fine. "You're Colt," she said. "Yes." "He's told me about you, I know." A pause. "He talks about you every day, Colt," said Eli. "It's true, it doesn't need to be said." "It does, though," said Colt, with complete calm, because she traveled a long way, and she should know that it was worth traveling. Silence. Nara looked at Colt for a long moment. Then she looked at Eli. "I like him," she said. "Everyone likes him," said Eli. "It's deeply inconvenient." Colt accepted this as straightforward fact and said nothing further. That evening, Wren arrived, less surprising than it should have been. She simply appeared on the south ridge the way she appeared everywhere, as though she had been there for a while and had decided now was the appropriate moment to be visible. She had 3 people with her, an older man and a young woman from the Western community, and a boy about Colt's age who turned out to be named Reed and who looked at the valley with the expression of someone doing very rapid calculations about whether this was a place worth staying. The calculation apparently came out positive. Reed helped Eli carry timber the next morning without being asked, which said everything that needed to be said. March became a particular kind of busy, not the desperate, urgent busy of August. The ordinary busy of people building something, more sleeping space needed, 2 more platforms, which Colt supervised with what Eli privately thought of as his foreman expression, the one where he stood with his arms crossed and watched you work, and said things like "that joint is going to shift before you'd even finished it," which was annoying because he was always right. Harriet sent word. The federal examiner had completed his review. The order against Eli Cade had been formally withdrawn. The names of Nara and Wren had been removed from the district records. The senator's involvement in the original operation was under separate investigation and would be for some time, which was the legal system's version of ongoing, and would not be resolved quickly, but the immediate danger was resolved. Paper gone. Eli read the letter on the porch. Then he sat there for a while. He was not sure what he expected to feel. Relief, obviously. And he did feel that, but underneath it something more complicated. The specific sensation of a weight you have carried so long that you've stopped noticing it, and then it's gone. And the absence is almost louder than the weight was. 5 years. He put the letter in his coat pocket, next to the wallet, next to the photograph, next to Vane's folded note, objects of a different life, kept as evidence. Nara came out. She had been inside reviewing the second sleeping platform with Colt, which apparently required significant consultation regarding structural integrity. She sat beside him, not with her former distance. Beside, the porch step, the valley, the March sun doing its careful new work on the aspens. It came. She said yes, both names, both names. She looked at the valley for a long time. Below in the meadow, Reed and 2 of the other children who had arrived in the past weeks were doing something that appeared to involve sticks and a system of rules they had invented and were now arguing about with the particular intensity of people who invented the rules. and have already found the loopholes. Wren was at the stream doing something practical with water storage that she had explained to Eli twice and that he still only partially understood. The valley was loud with ordinary life. Loud with it, Nara, said Eli. Eli, I have something. He reached into his coat. Not the wallet, not the photograph. A different pocket, the interior one, where he'd put something 3 days ago when Harriet's rider had come through the settlement south of here and mentioned, in passing, that a certain person had also sent a certain package, a small cloth bag. He put it on the porch step between them. She looked at it, did not touch it yet. Harriet, he said. Nara picked it up, opened it. The sound of coins was specific and unmistakable. She turned the bag over and put her hand underneath it, and they fell into her palm, 10 silver dollars. Exactly. Old silver, worn. The edges soft from handling. She looked at them. She looked at him. She kept them, said Eli. From Dry Fork, the auctioneer. Apparently he was a man who kept things he felt uncertain about. Harriet knows him. She wrote and asked, and he sent them. Why did she keep them? She said she didn't know. She said it felt like they were supposed to go somewhere, and she didn't know where yet. Nara was quiet. The coins in her palm caught the March sun. Old silver doing what old silver does in good light, not glittering exactly. Something quieter, something more like remembering. They don't belong to you, said Nara. Softly, no, said Eli. They never did. No, she looked at the meadow below, at Reed and the stick game, at Wren at the stream, at the pines on the slopes and the aspen buds coming and the sky that was the specific blue of early spring in the mountains, clearer than summer blue, sharper. They belong to this, she said. She closed her hand around them, set them on the porch step, not giving them back to him, not keeping them for herself, just setting them down in this place, which was theirs now, which had been built, in some essential way, from whatever those $10 had started the day. Eli laid them on a table in Dry Fork and stopped thinking. She put her hand on his chest, over the coat, over the pocket with the wallet and the photograph and the paper that was no longer a threat, over whatever was there underneath all of it. His heart doing its ordinary work, he put his hand over hers. They sat in the March sun and said nothing for a while, which was not absence of language, but the full presence of something that didn't need it. Below, in the meadow, the stick game had resolved into something. Either agreement or complete abandonment. It was hard to tell from here. Colt had appeared at the edge of the meadow with his drawing book. He sat cross-legged in the new grass and opened it and looked up at the valley with the evaluating, patient expression of someone who has decided this is the moment, this is when it's finished. He put charcoal to paper and began to draw. The evening was warm for March. They ate outside, all of them. Colt and Reed and the 3 children who had come with Wren and the older man who had decided without announcement that this valley suited him and he would stay and contribute in whatever way was needed, which turned out to be that he knew how to manage a kitchen garden in mountain soil and had opinions about it that were worth having. Harriet had sent seeds. Of course she had. Impossible, persistent seeds for an impossible, persistent kitchen garden. The fire was low and steady. Someone, Colt probably, had put a flat stone near it and lined several tin cups along it to stay warm. The valley smelled of pine and new earth and wood smoke and a particular clean smell of snowmelt water running in a stream nearby. Eli looked around the fire. These people, these specific, complicated, scarred, stubborn, alive people. He thought about Dry Fork, August, the leather wallet and the decision that wasn't a decision, the voice that said keep going and the part of him that listened. You always did make everything harder than it had to be, Vane had said. And maybe, but look at the thing the difficulty had made. Look at this table, this fire. These faces. Nara, across the fire, was listening to the older man explain something about soil drainage with the expression of someone who finds the subject legitimately interesting. Her profile in the firelight was, He was not going to attempt that sentence. He was going to simply look. She felt him looking. Turned, raised an eyebrow, barely. Just enough. He shook his head slightly, nothing. Just this. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she went back to the soil drainage, which was fine, which was actually perfect. Because this was the thing about ordinary life that the dramatic version never got right. It was not the moments of declaration or resolution. It was not the signing of papers or the laying down of weapons or the vuge. It was this, the fire. The tin cups warming on a flat stone. The specific person across from you who knows you looked and chose to let you. The kitchen garden seeds in their small paper packets, waiting for spring. The drawing book on Colt's knee. The valley rendered in charcoal, finished now complete. The $10 silver on the porch step. Not Eli's, not Nara's, this place's. This life's, the voice in Eli's head, which had been his companion for 5 years, which had kept him moving when moving was the only available response to being alive, was quiet, not gone. Just not needed right now. He looked at the fire. He looked at the valley going dark around them, the stars appearing over the eastern ridge in their numbers, more stars than any sky needed. But there they were anyway, insisting on themselves. He thought about Eleanor. He thought about his daughter. He thought, and this was new. This was something that had been coming slowly for 7 months and had finally arrived, not with grief. Not with the smoke and the weight of it. With something that was quieter than grief and more lasting. With love, just love, still there. Not resolved, not replaced, just settled. Like water finding its level, like a door finding its frame. Like a man finding, after 5 years and $10 silver and a direction called north, the exact shape of the life he had been trying to get back to, not the same life, a different one. A different one that had, in it, the same things that mattered, people worth staying for, work worth doing, morning sun on an east-facing meadow, and north, still north. But north now was here.